Morning, and thank you for joining us for the September/October DG community event. I'm thrilled to have tonight with us Laura McCallum to join us on this call, and I'll just do a brief introduction tonight before we get going, which will be a Q&A format. And as ever, the session is recorded, but if to be able to share it amongst our social media platforms afterwards. Laura is a Scottish sports lawyer and has recently become the General Legal Counsel for Aberdeen Football Club, where she oversees all the football regulatory matters at the club, including compliance, disciplinary and governing body requirements for player transfers and contracts, as well as the contractual and legal matters at the club. So congratulations, Laura, on that role. And prior to this, she was Head of Football Administration and Legal Affairs at Dundee United Football Club, and I might be biased, but that is the best club in Dundee. But before entering the football sphere, Laura began her legal career training with Irwin Mitchell, followed by time spent with a private practice Scottish law firm Harper McLeod, before moving in-house to Lombardi Associates, which is an Edinburgh-based football consultancy. Amongst many other roles, Laura is also the company secretary at Scottish Athletics. And whilst that's a whirlwind stop, it is a real pleasure to have Laura to join us on our call tonight. And with that, I say welcome, Laura, and I'll hand over to Dan.
Thanks, Jodie.
Thanks, Jodie. Yeah, and so it's great, Laura. Thanks so much for you taking the time to have a chat to us. As you may know, I'm sure you know the aim of the community generally is to talk with like-minded people to share stories, experiences, sort of career pathways, self-development tips, and everything else sort of in between. And we've done a few of these together at different times. It's great to have you on board. So all I would say to the people that's listening, watching across different platforms, please feel free just to ask questions as we go. Laura's got some fantastic stories to share, because actually, just like myself and Jodie, for a long period of time, prior to us being in the sports sphere, we were, lawyers doing a variety of different bits of work in different sectors. And Laura's journey into sports and football is a really cool one as well. So, Laura, if I can ask just the first general question, which is, I think I know the answer to it, but for everybody else, that your general interest in sport and football, has it always been there? And in a way, did that lead you on a quite not straightforward pathway to know what you wanted to do, but to at least give you a sort of glimmer as to what the possibilities might be?
Yeah, I've always had an interest in sport. Growing up, I've always been involved in sport in some shape or form. As a child, I was often taken to the football by my dad, by my nana. I was the only girl in a kind of crowd of boys, if you like, in terms of cousins and whatnot. And back then, you rarely saw women's football. It wasn't really a thing back then. I never ever had the exposure to that, because all my cousins were growing up all into football. I think I got kind of taken along with them, really, to go and watch games of football, which is where my interest and passion for football came from. And then when I did my law degree, I remember being in the law library at university. And I was supposed to be, studying towards some kind of essay or some kind of assignment that I had at the time. And I was, that typical way you go searching through the rows of books, looking for your kind of references and whatnot. And I remember coming across this really, really old book, really big book, thick book, all on sports law. And I'd never heard of sports law before by that point. And I started reading it, and really it was a book on what laws apply to sport, if you like. You get sports law and you get sport and the law. And this was a book really on sport and the law. And that, I think, gave me, insight and exposure as to how the law relates to sport, different areas of the law that you can become involved in that's helpful. if you're looking to get involved in sport. And that's really where my interest peaked. And through that, I, had various kind of work placements, various little bits of exposure here and there as my career developed.
And if I can ask just one follow-up question to that, Laura, which was then, I can only speak from my own experience, and looking back, it seems more straightforward than it was. But when you're talking about, looking at that first sports and law book, the thing that always I was fascinated by, and I don't know if you feel the same way, is like when you're doing parts of your law course, contract law, tort, property, EU law, whatever else it might be, sometimes it was quite, not a chore, but it was difficult to remember things. It was difficult, to remember all the facts of particular cases, how they stuck and what they meant and the significance. And it was, almost a guilty pleasure sometimes to read EU law cases, contract cases involving sport or football or F1 or rugby or cycling or judo or, netball, whatever it was, that those circumstances just stuck that little bit more quickly. I don't know what I could describe it, but it was almost like, because they were the things that were generally more of interest to me, it more or less just stayed with me that little bit longer. Did you have that then in a similar way, to know this is what I really want to do, because not only do I do it as a pastime and enjoy it, but because it actually comes that little bit more easily? Or was there sort of other underlying things in terms of that idea from progression to university and then onwards from there?
No, I mean, I think I'm completely in the same boat as you. There was an interest there. There was a passion there. Instead of reading up on what I should have been reading up on as part of my assignments, I was finding myself nosing books, even in Westlaw, for instance, searching sport as a keyword and reading. It's a little bit like, I can probably liken it a bit to when you're a university student, when you're a law student in your first couple of years, everybody's interested in criminal law because the cases are kind of juicy, if you like. They're more, they're not as dull, the circumstances of the case, as contract law or financial services law or whatever. And I think, I can liken it a bit to that. And that's where my passion comes from. And I'm also interested in how, the differences with sports law and sport and the law as well, and in terms of, using the legal knowledge and your legal training to shape the rules and regulations of how sport is ran as well.
Joe, did you want to go on the question? I had one more, but I didn't know what I didn't.
Yeah, I had a follow up as well in terms of I guess when you were at uni or when you were doing your traineeship or when you began your legal career. Obviously you knew sports was something that you wanted to do, but what challenges kind of did you face at the outset, and kind of how did you, if you had any, how did you overcome them in terms of perhaps exposure to getting the work that you wanted to do, or just navigating your way to try and get opportunities in the sports sector?
So, I mean, there was numerous challenges. First of all, I graduated from university in 2005. Well, my first degree was 2005. And, back then the sports law sector wasn't as developed as it is now. So that was the first challenge. And it wasn't developed even in England, never mind Scotland, where it's less developed even today than it is, down in England. There was only, one or two practices that had a reputation for it. Those law firms were challenging to get traineeships with. Even if you did get a traineeship with those law firms, it was challenging to get into the particular departments that worked on sports law. And what I did was, I think I was maybe 17 at the time, 17, 18. I had initially written to Celtic and a number of other football clubs in and around the Glasgow area. Celtic, Rangers, Partick Thistle, I think was another one. And whilst I was at university, it was only Celtic that actually responded to me. none of the other football clubs responded to me, and I wasn't actually taken into the legal department. And this is where I think, it's this is why I think we shouldn't always get hung up on sports law, or that you have to actually get the experience from a law department or a legal department or the law team within a football club or any particular sports organisation. It was the HR department that contacted me at when had responded to me when I'd contacted them at Celtic, and they got me in when I was about 17 or 18, still at university, and gave me various tasks to do around kind of employment law related matters. So I drafted their grievance and disciplinary handbook, worked on other kind of employment law issues. They took me to kind of staff disciplinary meetings that were being held under the ACAS codes, and that gave me a bit of sight as into employment law in a sports setting. And then I kind of kept in touch with the guys at Celtic and built relationships with them. So some of who are, some of the people are still employed by Celtic today. I was also invited back into Celtic and worked for a few weeks in their brand protection department. Again, not the legal department, but it was basically all around the protection of the Celtic crest, the Celtic brand, the Celtic trademarks, and it was sending kind of cease and desist letters, trawling the internet looking for infringements. We also went out kind of on location, as I like to call it, where we went to various kind of shops looking for infringements. And again, that was a really good insight. In fact, I've got a lot of interest in intellectual property rights, and in particular brand protection and trademark infringements, and where a club can go with that in terms of protecting the brand, protecting their trademarks, and also their media rights in terms of broadcasting and whatnot. And that has all come from not being in a legal department, but being in a brand protection department of a football club. And I think that's, important to keep in mind. And Jodie, I know you and I have spoken about that before in terms of, your career thus far, and the types of the types of practice areas that you were exposed to before you were in your current role, and how they can, transfer into a sports setting.
Yeah, I think that's really important to note, actually, that you don't need to get experience in just the legal department of any sports organisation. It can be anywhere, and you can, learn and adapt about different sectors as well. I think that's really important and really important to note.
Laura, can I ask just a couple of points there? Firstly, I'm interested in sort of proactivity generally, because one of the things you talked about going into Celtic or going into other organisations, I'm sure during and after your degree, is that proactivity to say, can I come and have some work experience? Can I come and do those type of things? Where did that
Sorry, it's just if I don't move about, the lights go off in here, so I just move about.
As long as you can still hear us, that's the most important.
It's okay. It wasn't that I'd had enough.
That wasn't even the technology, was it? Really, it was literally So what I was just trying to get at was, you're obviously a really proactive, can-do person. You can see that from the conversation you were just having then about Celtic, about obviously networking and relationship building, which I'd love to come on to in a little bit of time to talk about. But that mindset of putting yourself out there and looking for opportunities and seeing what the world has to offer, was that something that was a little bit inbuilt? Was it through people that you had, lucky enough to have conversations with? Is that like a family thing that was developed, or people told that was a good way to go about doing things? How did you develop that type of mindset and productivity?
So I was, do you know what? It was probably born out of a realisation that if I didn't stick my head above the parapet, then nobody was going to, offer me a role like that. I had to stick my neck out to be able to get in there. But certainly growing up, my family, my on my dad's side in particular, my auntie's favourite saying when I was a child growing up, she used to say it to me all the time, Dan, was if you don't ask, you don't get. And there had been times where I would just be sitting about, going through the usual channels, making applications, and I had to make myself stick out from everybody else. And I just stuck my neck out. I sent out various emails, and I was lucky that somebody responded and said, "Sure, come on in." I went, and it was voluntary. I went in voluntarily. It wasn't a paid gig or anything. And yeah, and I think that's where I've done that on numerous occasions. Just stuck my neck out, and just hoped for the best, really.
I think it's such a good thing though, because I'm of the view if you don't ask, you don't get. And also if you do ask, the worst they can say is no.
Yeah.
But if you never ask, the answer will always be no. But if you do, I was of that kind of a view as well when I was doing applications and emails and whatnot, as well.
And I think it's so important not to be deterred. You will get no's.
We all have. All of us, I'm sure all of us have. And we just keep going. It builds resilience, doesn't it? And you just keep going and keep going. And for some, as we've spoken about before, Dan, like it could be door number 1 that opens for one person, but for I and many others, it could be like door 50 or door 60. It doesn't matter. And you just keep going, and you learn from your failures as well.
If I can ask one point there, Laura, exactly on that point, if your auntie was saying if you don't ask, you don't get, that the flip side, just as we said there, is sometimes even if you ask, you don't get as well.
Yeah.
How Jodie and I have talked to a lot of different people, which has been great, about this idea of if it doesn't happen immediately, it's not something necessary to give up on, I think is the point. Or if an opportunity doesn't necessarily happen, then sometimes play the medium to long game is something that we hear quite often. Bearing in mind then that you are putting yourself out there more, which means that in a way you are going to possibly get knocked back to more, but actually still more opportunities will create for themselves. What was your mindset and approach for that usual, in my sense sometimes, position of, well, thanks Daniel, but no, and thanks Daniel, but maybe next time, or thanks, but it's not going to happen? Did you literally have a position where it was like, well, fine, we forget about it and move on? Or was it a little bit more sort of complicated based on, different aspects of your character and different ways that you've been brought up?
For me, I definitely played the medium to long game. I mean, to give you an idea, it wasn't that I was very fortunate, and I recognise I was very fortunate to kind of that Celtic wrote back to me. And it's a funny story actually as to how they wrote back to me, because the reason they came back to me was because I'd actually written to Peter Lawwell directly, and Peter Lawwell's, back then, we're talking about 15 years ago or so. Back then, you didn't have social media. People's email addresses weren't so readily available. And I'd managed Peter Lawwell's email address, certainly wasn't out there. And it was, he had a different structure of kind of email address than most of the people at Celtic. But I had managed to find I kind of researched it online. I'd managed to find some other Celtic director's email address somehow or another, which had a different structure from everybody else's. And so I tried. And this is going to sound quite stalkerish. And the more I'm telling this story, I'm thinking to myself, maybe I shouldn't be telling this story. But I'd managed to find this other structure of an email address at Celtic and put it together with what I knew about Peter's personal details, and it pinged, and he got it. And the reason the HR department got in touch with me was because they said, he basically said, I want you to do something for this girl because she's managed to work out what my email address is at such a young age when not many people are able to do that even when they're adults. So that's how I managed to get into Celtic. But it was just work experience, and I've got great relationships with the guys at Celtic now, including Chris and Michael, who are in the legal team at Celtic. But in actual, my sports law career itself didn't actually take off until maybe 10 years later or something. And Harper McLeod was the kind of main sports law firm in Scotland at that time. And I didn't get in there for a traineeship. I went to Irwin Mitchell instead. I knew I wouldn't get any sports law experience there. But I knew at some point, it's easier to get into private practice, different firms once you've done your traineeship. So I never gave up on Harper McLeod. And eventually I managed to get into the department of Harper McLeod that practiced in what I trained in, basically. Now, it wasn't the sports law practice, but I knew all I had to do was get in the door and then build up relationships. And it was at that time, Dan, that I created my blog, which you'll remember. And I created my Twitter page, Laura Sports Law. That's when Dan and myself and Dan struck up a relationship. And what I did before approaching Rod McKenzie, who was the kind of head of the sports law department, worked for the SPFL. The SPFL were our clients. I had to make myself look different from everybody else. So I created the blog, and I was writing articles on that blog for the best part of maybe a year to 18 months before I even approached Rod. I was liaising with lots of different people who worked in sports law, Dan being one of them. And I actually ended up creating a portfolio of all the work that I'd done. I joined my master. I signed up for the Masters in International Sports Law because I needed to ensure that I needed to make him aware, have him know that I was serious about it and that I wasn't just doing it because everybody wants to do sports law, because that's the other thing I would say. With Harper McLeod in particular, 90% of the applications that you see will say that they want to join the dispute resolution department because they want to do sports law. But sports law is just a small percentage of the actual work that the dispute resolution department does. And the thing is that the firms don't want solicitors just because they want to do sports law. They want to know what skills you can bring to the department and what skills you can bring to any sports law work if there is sports law work going. And again, I suppose that points to the kind of proactiveness again, Dan, and eventually I had my meeting with Rod, and Rod kind of took me under his wing. And I got experience that way, and that's where the development really started.
Laura, I might just ask one more question on that as well, because one of the things that I say to a lot of people, when I'm sure you do as well now, when you're talking about, and I'll like to ask this question in a little bit about when people ask, I want to be a sports lawyer, or I want to get into the sports industry, or I want to work in football, etc. And it was actually one of the pieces of advice a while back that I gave to Jodie, which she definitely took on board, which was, there's one thing saying you want to do it, and there's another thing actually then doing it as a result. And I always said that one of the things that would set people apart to a degree is, put content out there, should demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, that you can draft a blog or an article piece well, that you're talking and relying on, lots of different facets of the industry. And, you get found out pretty quickly if you're trying to write something that you don't really understand. And so, I remember really, vividly, really, when I was reading a lot of your blog stuff, generally, I was like, this is really interesting and very useful, because no one knows everything about everything. That's the whole point. And so you're writing great stuff on, I think, training compensation and other bits. I was like, that's actually really helpful and good to know in various points. So again, was that something that was proactively like, right, well, I just need to start writing on this stuff? Or was it some advice that someone else had given you to say to to set yourself apart, to stand out from the crowd. These are the lengths you need to go to in order to get there.
Yeah, no, I mean, being completely honest with you, Dan, I wasn't given advice by anybody. There was nothing like, I mean, what yourself and Jodie are doing tonight is, what you have been doing is fantastic. There was nothing like that, which was just, maybe 6 years ago, nothing like that at all. And it was really about getting myself out there, business development as well. I felt that, look, if I can write these articles, and I researched them to the death. I mean, there were some topics that, I had knowledge of, but I didn't have the practical experience of, and I researched them to death. I even invited other people to come and write on the blog with me when, they had more of the knowledge and more of the kind of practice areas, actual practical experience. And again, it was all about, even if it didn't work out at Harp McLeod, somebody else might see me. And that's where it had all come from. And it was also, it was around about the time where a lot of law firms were starting blogs, and they were sharing blog articles on social media on lots of different things. It could be media law, it could be medical law, it could be personal injury stuff. And I thought, well, why can't I do one on sports related matters? And what I was basically doing was, the idea for the content was coming from listening to current issues in sports, and basically applying the law to that. And that, you know what, that's another, just when you talk about training compensation, one of the other points, and I don't know if I'm skipping across maybe upcoming questions, is that one of the things to remember about, if you want to be a sports law is, and you touched on it, Dan, is that it's not all 24/7 glamour or fun. 90% of it is applying just the black letter law, which is so important to get that experience and, expose yourself to different practice areas, in your current work just now. Because my job, and the other things, if you're working in-house, and I don't know if Jodie will agree with this or not, but certainly in a football club, it's a lifestyle choice. It's basically 24/7. I'm at the games at the weekend. I work at the weekends. I'm in late, during the weeks as well. But in terms of like player contracts, transfer agreements, etc., training compensation calculations and disputes and whatnot, they all tend to happen around about the transfer window, of which there's only 2 per year. So, 90% of the time it's all black letter law, employment law issues. Yesterday, I was looking at the Gambling Act in relation to prize competitions, prize draws that the club might want to touch upon, health and safety issues around the stadium, property law. We're in the process of hopefully building a new stadium. So there's a lot of property law involved in that. And then, of course, you get disputes too. So there's litigation as well.
I remember you telling the story about the glamorous side of having to tell off some of the scholars at some point as well, which I'm sure definitely added to the recruitment drive for sports lawyers.
Yeah, at Dundee United, they don't train you how to reprimand a house full of players under the age of 18 who have gotten bored one night and decided to play games that has inadvertently significantly destroyed property in a house that you don't own, and the property is owned by the landlord.
So funny. That's hilarious. On that topic, I guess, as well, of building relationships and networking, it's something that Dan and I have a thread throughout mostly all of our chats with the guests and just with each other. And I guess from your point of view as well, it'd be good to know what you went through in terms of networking, how you networked, and whether you still do it today and how that's applied, and one on how you maintain the relationships that you have with others that you've met along the way.
Yeah, most of my networking's come from my Twitter page. That's my main networking tool. I've met loads of people. I've built up some great relationships through my Twitter page. I prefer Twitter to LinkedIn, funnily enough.
I think actually, Laura, that's how we met. I actually
Mhm.
genuinely think I had reached out to your Twitter. I genuinely think that's how we then connected.
Yeah, that's how Dan and I met as well, through Twitter. And then obviously you go to conferences and then you see the people that you meet on Twitter at these conferences. It's all become a little bit kind of strange through the pandemic, but that's how I keep in touch with people, through Twitter and the various kind of conferences that occur from time to time. But the main one is Twitter. That's my main networking tool.
And when you were kind of, I guess, up and coming, did you just reach out to people and just send them like tweets or DMs or whatnot? And did you ask for advice, or were you just planting out, here's my blog, look at this, can you have a review of this topic? Or how did you go about with your Twitter?
It's probably a combination of both. I used to post my blog. What I did first of all was I posted the articles up on my blog and I waited for feedback, and people would come to me first of all to comment on the articles and how well I drafted it and whatnot, and that it was interesting, and I would build up conversations that way. Once I had a bit of credibility almost, and then through that I got speaking to other kind of solicitors that practice in the sport industry, Dan, some other solicitors across England, and they gave me a bit of advice about where your career could go, and a lot of the time it was kind of moving away from Scotland, which was something that I didn't want to do, being a bit of a home bird. It was coming up to Aberdeen was hard enough for me, but yeah. So a lot of it was just, and you know what? A lot of the time, it was arising from informal conversations. So it wasn't like cold. It wasn't like the Celtic situation where it was like a letter that I sent out cold. It was, there had been kind of conversations built up, informal chit chat around lots of different things, and then I would reach out.
Yeah, no, that mirrors probably something similar as to what I did, I think, as well, when I was reaching out and networking with people. And mine was a bit more recent than, I guess, than your was, only over the last couple of years. But I think that's kind of how we networked, probably Dan and I as well. Dan and I were through email, and Laura and I were through Twitter, then I think LinkedIn, and then obviously over time we've met for coffee and at various events and whatnot, and then maintained that kind of professional like connection since then. But as I was saying a bit earlier, it just feels a bit full circle that not so long ago I was talking to both of you about what I could do to get my foot in the door, and now that I'm here and we're doing this, it's just rather bizarre, to be honest. But obviously your advice worked, to be honest. Like, both of your advice must have worked.
Well, let's ask the question. So before, in a bit of prep for this, you both were talking about you catching up in a restaurant and the advice, Laura, that you were providing to Jodie. When people approach you, which I know is very regularly, and it might be as specific as how do I get into sports law, or it might be I want to get into the football industry, just as like it might be, for someone in music or film or TV, how do I get into that sector otherwise? What are the type of things? The lights have gone out again. I'm going to keep speaking. But what do you find, Laura, that are the types of things that you more or less constantly are saying by way of best practices, thoughts and ideas, things to do to get that foot in the door, to, if you don't ask, you don't get, the types of, if it's non-negotiables or little tidbits that you can see have helped people over the years?
So I find that when anybody messages me, it's I'm looking to get into the sport industry, or I'm looking to get in football, I'd like to do what you do, etc. And I'm wondering how I can get experience, and how I can build up skills and experience that will help me get a role like you're in. I always say to them, well, what are you doing just now? You know, because I bet you that there's skills that, you know, if you're already a practicing solicitor, 9 times out of 10, they are practicing solicitors. Sometimes they're students, which is a little bit different. But if they're practicing solicitors, I normally say, think about skills that you need for the job that you're doing just now. Think about the practice areas that you're getting exposed to, and think about what ones can transfer over. So, for instance, I did litigation, and there's various skills that can come from that that are transferable. Proactiveness, being able to juggle a workload, just knowing general dispute resolution. I also did medical law, which is very relevant working in any sports setting when you've got medical professionals as employees, in terms of what their duty of care is to the athletes that are also your employees. I did personal injury as well, which is relevant. I did a lot of safety work, so that was transferable. So there was a lot of different. I had a wide kind of experience in you know, a range of practice areas that could all cross over to work at a football club. In time, I developed the football regulatory side of things, was unique to the football industry, just the same as you'll have other sport, you know, tennis, for instance, where Jodie works, you'll have your own little world of rules and regulations that's unique to tennis. So that's one of the things I always say to solicitors who are already practicing. For students, I normally say, go and study, go and find you know, your practice areas in black letter law. And if you're doing your traineeships, you're going to, you know, being able to draft contracts. That's such a for working in football, because you're drafting not only player contracts and transfer agreements, also sponsorship agreements, different types of commercial agreements. So I think that's all very relevant.
And one more point on that, Laura, because a lot of the time I'm sure those people and the students will sometimes say, can I have work experience? Can I come along and shadow you? And
Dan, not being funny, I think I asked Laura probably one, if not both of those questions, but maybe one. I can't really remember, but it was something along those lines. And I think actually Laura might have given me a phone call in the first instance. I can't really remember, and I don't know why she even replied to my tweet in the first place. I've got no idea, but she did. And then, but yeah, that's the first thing as well. People are really grateful for your time, and even to get a response from anyone, especially when you're a student or someone trying to get into the sector, getting a response from someone or anyone when often you don't get actually any, it's just so nice and rewarding. So yeah, we're obviously really grateful at the time when I was, but even now when people ask me, you know that they're grateful to get a response, because I was in that position not so long ago. So it's yeah, it is always well received when you do take time and reply to tweets or messages, and I'm sure you both get multiple a day.
Well, yeah, it's true. And I think some of the thing that I always think quite hard about is, you know, the trouble with all of our work is that we're generally quite busy with stuff.
Just to let you know, obviously we've had a bit of...
Oh, sorry, Laura, I think you were slightly on delay. Jodie, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can, but I don't know if Laura's having
I think Laura might have been just slightly behind with things. I'll give her maybe internet connection a second just to catch up, maybe. Laura, can you hear us okay?
leave and rejoin if it's
So
easier. You might be able to just
hear you guys. I can hear you. Can you hear me? It's draining because of the technical difficulties we've had earlier on today. It's draining my battery. So right. I've got less than, I just had a message pop up saying I had less than 10%. So I don't know if that's doing it. My phone's absolutely boiling hot, but let's see how we get
Don't worry.
Better now.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
perfect.
fine.
That's super. Yeah.
Well, let's just go for one or two last questions, Jodie, because we certainly don't want to mean that battery runs out or not. You go for it. We've got a couple of good questions, I know.
Yeah, and just one of the last ones I had that Dan and I often speak about daily habits of things that we've done, journaling or article reading, things like throughout working and personal life. I just wondered if there's any things which you now do that you didn't do before but are now part of your daily routine.
Yeah, well, one of the exercises I do daily, I guess it goes back to working in house. And Jodie, you might find this. It's that I've got it now, but I never used to have it. When I was at Dundee United, I never had access to Westlaw or practical law or anything like that. So I was very much out of the loop a lot of the time in terms of I had to go to kind of Bailey or rely on legal blogs for current awareness. I also don't, working in house, one of the things you really miss is not having other solicitors around you. So you're not hearing, regular legal chat and whatnot. So one of the things that I do, I've now got access to Westlaw, and every morning I check current awareness to know what's happening in all the different practice areas. And 9 times out of 10, the current awareness hasn't actually got anything to do with sport regulatory matters, the way the outside world thinks of sports law. It's normally about what do I need to be aware of in terms of practice areas in the law that's going to affect the football club, so I can communicate that out to people, or I can be ready for it. So that's one of my kind of daily exercises.
It's a really interesting one, actually, Laura, because in private practice, I'm lucky enough, the same with you, Jodie, to a degree, you're surrounded by other lawyers that you can bounce ideas off and have different thoughts and processes more generally. So now I can completely understand. Maybe, Laura, that might mean you can join some of our Sheridan's conversations every now and then that we have on knowledge building and all the rest of which might actually be quite useful. We do that every week, so you're more than happy to join.
Absolutely, I would love that. See, there you go again, me sticking my neck out. See, if you don't ask it.
No, I totally agree. Laura, I'm really worried that your phone's going to die out on you halfway through. I was asking questions. So Dan, I don't know is it just better just to wrap up? I don't want Laura just to cut out halfway through. I'd rather not.
Yeah, all good. Well, yeah, I mean, Laura, firstly, thank you so much for chatting to us. I always think it's fascinating to hear people's stories, but more importantly, just to understand their mindset on stuff. And obviously, the stories that you've told us have shown that sort of proactivity and that resilience to a degree to get where you've got to. And it's fantastic to see, your head of legal at GC at Aberdeen, and I'm positive there's fantastic things on the horizon for you as well. So yeah, Jodie, I'm not sure if you want to say anything to finish off too.
No, yeah, just thanks so much for joining us. For me as well, it's so great to have like a female in such a powerful position in the sports law sector. Like you, Laura, growing up, I didn't have any females at all that I could see in those roles. So for people like you who've kind of gone before me, it's so great to be able to follow, hopefully in their footsteps and going forward. So I think, yeah, it's great the work that you've done and will continue to do. So yeah, thanks very much from me as well. It's been fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Jodie, and thank you both for inviting me on and for giving lots of food for thought over the years. I'm really appreciative of Jodie.
For sure. Thanks, Laura, and hope you enjoy your evening. Thanks again.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura. Cheers. See you later.
Bye.